Luke and Mara Jade Skywalker stood in the trapezoidal entrance to the cliff dwelling that had been their home and shelter on Zonama Seacot for what had felt like 3 standard weeks. Torrential rain continued to lash the middle distance, driven by gales powerful enough to snap and topple the giant boras and strip the reddish trees of their globular leaves. Caught in an updraft, 3 sheets of lamina building material spiraled up from the floor of the chasm and disappeared over the rim. "This place is coming apart," Mara said. Luke nodded, but said nothing. To Luke's left stood R2-D2. Luke put his left hand on the astromech droid's hemispherical head. "Don't worry, R2. We'll come through this all right." R2 swiveled his primary photoreceptor to Luke. "Corrin is coming," Luke announced in a matter-of-fact tone. Mara slipped out of his embrace and leaned out the entrance to gaze around, one hand clasping her long hair. "Where?" she said, just loudly enough to be heard. "I don't see." She interrupted herself when she saw his head poke above the rungs of a wooden ladder that rose from a lower tier. Soaked to the bone, Corrin held his jacket closed at the neck. "Jacen and Saba's airship has been spotted down valley," he shouted into the wind. "They should arrive any minute." Luke stepped out into the rain and wind to glance at the landing platform that jutted out over the canyon. He looked back at R2, who was whining in apprehension. "Stay here, R2. We'll be right back." The 3 Jedi hurried for the ladder. Corrin was only steps behind when they reached the platform itself, square and cantilevered by thick timbers anchored in the cliff face. From down valley, and drifting to and fro in the wind, appeared a cluster of what might have been balloons, holding aloft an oblong wooden gondola with an aft cabin. "There she blows," Corrin said. "You're not kidding," Mara said. She looked at Luke. "They'll never be able to land." "They will. They have the Force at their backs." Luke set himself in the near horizontal rain and focused his attention on the approaching airship. Through the Force, he could feel Mara and Corrin join him, and he could also feel the tremendous power Jacen and Saba were exercising to prevent the airship from being blown where the howling wind wanted to take it. Confidence surged through him. The Jedi were working not against the natural forces, but in harmony with them, availing themselves of just those gusts that would maneuver the airship to the destination they had chosen. Had there been better forewarning of the trap the 3 Yuuzhan Vong agents had sprung, Seacot also might have been able to maneuver Zonama through hyperspace to a safe landing. But the jump to lightspeed had been inadvertent, though fortunately in place of the planned destruction of the planet. When Zonama Seacot first emerged from transit, conditions were even worse than those that followed. Luke could remember staring into an unfamiliar night sky. Then, at daybreak, an enormous sun ballooning on the horizon like an explosion, too brilliant to regard, and radiating such heat that huge expanses of Tampasi had burst into flame. Seismic events had opened yawning, zigzagging fissures on the high plateaus, and gigantic slabs of rock had been thrust from the parted ground. Forest fires filled the already scorching air with smoke, cinder, and ash. Whether because of further misfortune or at Seacot's direction, none could say. But rain had been falling ever since. Under the guidance of the 5 Jedi, the airship completed its descent and made a satisfactory landing on the platform. Luke, Mara, and Corrin had the ship tethered to its docking cleats even before Jacen and Saba emerged from the small cabin. "Welcome back," Luke said, clapping his nephew on the shoulders, then hugging him. R2-D2 was chirping in excitement when the waterlogged Jedi filed through the trapezoidal entrance. A nourishing fire blazed in the center of the room, smoke escaping through a natural chimney. Luke took off his wet cloak and hung it by the fire, then sat down opposite Jacen and Saba. "Tell us everything." With a nod of her round head, Saba deferred to Jacen. "Conditions in the south are worse than here," the young man began. "The forests are scorched beyond recognition. The trails are impassable, and the rivers are too swollen to navigate. A lot of the boras are completely leafless, and the wildlife has been shocked into hibernation. Most of the Pharaohans reached the shelters in time, but hundreds died. Cybernetic organisms bred by the planet's early magisters overseers and liaisons with Seacot. The Gentari were the carvers and assemblers of Zonama's once celebrated living starships. Some Pharaohs are saying that the southern hemisphere is every bit as traumatized as it was when the Far Outsiders attacked. Jacen continued. Far Outsiders was the Pharaohan term for the Unifying, who had found and engaged Zonama Seacot some 50 years earlier, when first scouting the galaxy they planned to invade. Luke studied his hands and shook his head back and forth. Has anyone seen Jabbatha?
Not since the day Zonama caught fire,
Saba replied. Seacot's humanoid interface with its sentient residents, Jabbatha, was Zonama's current magister, the third in the planet's history. During her brief appearance following the planet's emergence from hyperspace, Jabbatha had said only that Seacot had desperate need of her elsewhere, and that she would return when she could. Present at the appearance, Luke and the other Jedi had quickly discerned that the Jabbatha who spoke to them was merely a thought projection of Seacot. That fact had been borne out later, when Jabbatha's entranced body had been discovered in her dwelling place. In front of the hearth, an apparition appeared, gradually manifesting as a tall, wide-eyed, dark-haired, and faintly blue-skinned woman, wearing a black robe decorated with green medallions that sparkled in the light of the fire. Jabbatha, Luke said, coming to his feet. Of a sort, Mara said quietly as she joined him.
Seacot wishes to reassure you that Zonama will persevere,
the thought-projected Jabbatha said without preamble.
Since perseverance will necessitate significant alterations to Zonama's present orbit and spin, it would be best if everyone remained in the shelters for the time being.
Luke drew in his breath, only to sense that his relief was premature.
I am also charged with advising you that Seacot needs time to reassess the possible consequences of returning Zonama to known space. As caretaker of the living force, the continued existence of Zonama Seacot is of utmost importance. Seacot has some idea where we are, Jabbatha was saying. It's possible that Zonama Seacot passed close to the star system during the crossings from known space.
Luke motioned across the room to R2-D2, who was standing silently against the wall. Tell Seacot that R2 can help compute the location, as soon as we can see the stars.
I will tell Seacot, Jabbatha said, dematerializing.
The 5 Jedi had yet to emerge from reflection when someone hurried out of the storm into the dwelling's anteroom. Danny, Luke said, even as he was turning toward her. Danny Quee's blonde hair hung loosely around her face, but her green eyes shone with excitement. Tekli and Tahiri, she said in a rush. Mara shot to her feet. What's happened? Danny motioned behind her, as if to something just outside the entrance. They're with him now! The Yuuzhan priest! Harar! She blinked and stared at Mara and the others. He's alive!